The whole world has been taken by a whirlwind or a tornado of AI.
Literature in many aspects also does shape how humans think about technology and how scientists think about technology.
Sense of contributing with technology that was getting imbibed in you.
My parents bought a 56.6 kbps US robotics state-of-the-art modem, and today our phones are doing
Boston Dynamics robots can just jump in the air, do a 360, but they're not here to take the jobs yet.
We are going to build a product out of India for the world. Even if it fails, you'll still have a story to tell, right?
AGI in the next 10 years, possible.
I'm a little bit of a skeptic. I think
Agentic AI is also the way to go forward then in that case. It seems to be like an AI race. Are we ready for ethical AI?
how do we build this system so that we have safety at the top of our agenda?
Who will come out on top, US or China or some other country? Are AI going to take away jobs? The Hustle Group Company. Let me introduce you to the Hustle Group Company. It's a lifestyle brand that's redefining streetwear through the power of fashion, self-belief, and resilience. The second one being Discover Dollar, which is an AI-driven tech company that helps brands and retailers recover hidden dollars from overpayments and leakages. DocsNow's intelligent platform empowers businesses of all sizes to rapidly collect, manage, govern, and collaborate on the data front, transforming your documents and making sure there's an impact on the business bottom line, all in a secure and a single environment. Hello everyone, welcome to yet another episode of the Innovators and Disruptors podcast. I'm your host Abhay Tandon, and today's episode is going to be very, very exciting because we're going to talk about an interesting guest who's a friend, who's a technologist, who's an innovator, who's been a contributor to the ecosystem. It's Vinayak Hegde. Thank you so much, Vinayak, for joining us today.
Thanks Abhay for having me on this podcast. Looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Vinayak is also someone who has touched multiple industries, and when he has touched those industries, he's been in those companies which has disrupted those industries as well, and he continues to do so. So I'm very excited to have this conversation with him, and I'll tell you what, this conversation is going to be talking about his journey of impact creation that he has been doing for so many years now, but it will also touch upon the subject of AI and the future of AI, which I think is going to be super exciting for the consumers of this podcast, the people who are going to be listening to us, the audience, and they will find it very exciting because today there's a lot of fear in the minds of a lot of people about the impact of AI. But I'll not go there straight away. Let me first talk to you a little bit about your journey, Vinayak. Can you give us a little bit of a perspective about what your growing up years were like? What were those key elements, key moments in your growing up, early childhood, when you were studying probably in school, college, and you felt that, there's a very interesting sense of contributing with technology that was getting imbibed in you?
Yeah, I think I was always interested in science, and both my parents were science graduates, so I used to read a lot of these magazines that used to come. I think nowadays you don't see magazines, but I think those were the predominant medium through which you used to do. And there was a lot of this, I think, because India, I think I grew up in the late 80s, early 90s. And this was a time when I think Russia was also very close to, or the USSR at that point was very close to India. So you had a lot of Russian magazines, even if you're studying for IIT, Irodov, or if you're younger, then Mir Publishers or Perelman. I think there was Fun with Maths and Physics. I think these were really popular. So I was very interested in that, and I did just like everyone. I studied in I grew up in Bombay, so I studied the Maharashtra board. And when I applied for engineering, I was told that maybe computer science would be a good, because I think you're kind of good with math, or and it is something that you would be interested in. And I had done some work with computers. I was very fortunate to have computers in my school. It was not very common way back then. So I've seen, as we were talking a little while before, I think at that point, we bought my parents bought a 56.6 kbps US robotics state-of-the-art modem. And today our phones are doing maybe much thousands more kilobits or megabits compared to that. But we've seen kind of the industry kind of evolve, and I think my career kind of evolved with that. So I did a startup. I didn't know that it was called a startup. We said, hey, we'll set up a business. It came out of school. So we built a solution on top of Linux, and that was like my first startup. We ran it for 3.5 years. We sold to a lot of SMEs, and we made a lot of mistakes. We started it when we were in college, but like an awesome experience, because in the morning we used to code, in the afternoon, we used to go and talk to customers, and then in the evening go back and solve those customer queries. And that's how we built. It was ramen profitable. After that, I went and joined a small startup called Speedera. They were setting up an office in Bangalore at that point of time. Before that, also worked for a brief stint in Microsoft, working on open source tools called Services for Unix, which was very, very interesting, because I was doing open source work in Microsoft during the Ballmer days. So it's quite interesting. And post that I started working in this startup, and that's when I came to Bangalore first, like in 2004.
Right.
And it was, I think, the beginning of the internet taking off. So I was working in building measurement solutions for the internet, saying that how does a user in X country experience the internet? What is the speed? Can you do streaming? Can you do like an e-commerce transaction? This was still the early days, so it was very fascinating, because you could see that it was exploding at the next level. So I did a lot of work which was very close to R&D. In fact, my boss was at that time was a professor who was teaching and in the US college, and a lot of the work that we did was published in papers and also implemented. So the boundary was very porous. It was very interesting, and I think those were also the days when I think we talk today about product-led growth and products, but this was like 2004, where still I think the service-based companies were largest. So I've always worked in like product-based companies.
Nice.
So I've kind of been very fortunate to be like riding on trends, and I worked there for like 5.5 years, and then I felt, okay, maybe I should try something different, because I'd gone deep. Because always my belief in my career has been that you should be like what I call a T-shaped person, right? You know a lot about specific fields, but you also I have depth in certain fields, and that's kind of what I followed. So I joined this like really small startup at that point of time called InMobi. I was working with the co-founder. Yeah,
Can you talk us through your journey of InMobi?
Yeah, I mean, we had to tell people that, we don't, because that time I think a lot of SMS spam used to come, and when we talked about advertising, that's what people used to relate it to. From that point where we had to tell people, because there was a company called OnMobile, right? And we had to tell, we are not that company, we do this. We've come a long way, right? I think Akamai has gone through its ups and downs, and now it's like a conglomerate. So it was very fascinating, because when I joined, we were just about 20 people.
This is InMobi.
This is InMobi, and they had I think they're just in the process of rebranding from mCoach, what it was called, to InMobi. And advertising was kind of upcoming. I mean, just to give you a sense, this was like 2009, and I think a lot of people are younger, probably be watching this part of younger than them. There was no Android. iOS had just come out. There was no iPad. So that is how early we were, right?
Yeah.
And I think I was fascinated by the vision, because here were like Indian founders who were saying, we are going to build a product out of India for the world. And I felt, I was working at Akamai at that point, and I felt, oh wow, I mean, I should join this company because the vision is big. If you, even if it like fails, you'll still have a story to tell, right? And I give this example of Amitabh Bachchan all the time, right? Amitabh Bachchan has done amazing films, and obviously he has had his ups and downs. He was injured on set, and a lot of people prayed for him. Then went through the phase where he almost went bankrupt.
Right.
But what people remember you for, or anybody, or any company for that matter, is the hit products or the thing. So whenever you think Amitabh Bachchan, we don't think of movies which have flopped, like I don't know, like Mard, Ajuba, Khuda. We don't remember those films. We think of Diwar, Shakti, all of those kind of films which were like massive hits, and he has had several wins. I think our lives and also of startups is also that way, right? You remember the high points, and I think that is what I think would be kind of the standout for me. Anyway, coming back, so I worked at InMobi, and it was like crazy, because iOS had just come out and iPhone had just come out, and you had Android, you had iPad, and there's huge amount of, we were growing, like I think we grew like something like 4,000x or like 3,500x in a matter of like 3 years. So it was quite insane, and it was an awesome team. But at some point I felt, fairly kind of burnt out. So I kind of decided to take a break. This was also the time where a life stage, I got married as well. I did consulting for a while, and that was very interesting because I consulted with non-profits, I consulted with smaller startups, and one of the startups was also Zoomcar, where I started consulting. And at some point, it just made sense that I should join them full time because I had written a bunch of systems for them, and it was one of the few startups that kind of exercised everything that I'd done till that point. I had done embedded systems in my first startup, which I talked about. I had done networks, and I had also done data. So it kind of combined all three, which was kind of fascinating. And also the travel I also like to travel. So it was also a segment that's close to my heart. And also another thing that worked is I was trying to see, what else can I do, because I'd always worked for a B2B segment, like, even in among the startups and corporate. So I said, okay, let me do B2C. And it was an amazing experience because we were doing ads on TV, and how growth can be taken. It's very, very different in a B2C setup as compared to a B2B setup, right? Where you're thinking platforms and GTM in a lot more structured way. Whereas in consumer, it kind of moves like really fast. Thinking is very, very different.
Very true.
UX, for example, and design is like, something that is is like right at the top. In B2B, you can sometimes get away by not doing such a great job. And there will be more tolerance as long as you solve the business problem pretty well. But you can't do that in consumer because there will always be options.
Yeah, they won't be as forgiving.
They won't be as forgiving.
They won't be as forgiving. And importantly, I think, again, in Zoomcar, right, for the first time, a concept such as Zoomcar's concept, right, around rental mobility was coming into play. India, if I'm not wrong, had not seen it in a very platformized, easy to access mechanism that you had created at Zoomcar. And that, I think, disrupted an industry. I think eventually I'm sure there would be a lot of other competitors who came in. But when you launched it, the stack behind it and the overall company, I think it was very different. It was transforming and it was disrupting a particular industry at large.
Founded like Headstart as well, because if you see in my journey, right, I've done a startup and I've always worked in the product space, and I always felt that as entrepreneurs, and you have been an entrepreneur.
I had no idea you were a co-founder of Headstart. Of course, I've been aware of Headstart. I know you've contributed a lot in Headstart, and there have been various guests on the show, Vinayak, who have come in and spoken very highly of Headstart, including someone like Mabel Chako, who's a co-founder of Open. And she spoke about Amit Singh, she spoke about Headstart, she spoke about Tai, and specifically Headstart from a fact that, even back in the day, when they shifted to Bangalore, about a decade plus ago, they made sure that they would attend the events on Saturdays, right, and Headstart events on over the weekend, because they didn't want to miss out on that because of the access to information, access to people that Headstart brought. So fantastic to hear that you've been the co-founder. I'm so sorry I didn't know about this.
No, so I think again, I have not publicized it, but I was active in the early years. I was founded in 2008 and came out of. Many of the founders of Headstart were at bar camps, and we said, hey, all of us have been entrepreneurs. We are working for startups, and this was, I think, the pre-Ola, pre-Flipkart days, where you had to really tell people, especially in my first startup, when I did a startup, I came into the industry just after the .com burst, and a lot of people, my juniors used to call me and say, if you are not getting a job, let us know. Why are you doing this? So from there to it being like a tag of honor to work for a startup, we have come a long way. And Headstart was started to kind of, because all of us, if you look at the founders, all of us had this pain point saying that we have this problem where it is not accepted. How do we create this network? Because it will benefit us. So we started doing these meetups, and then we branded it as Startup Saturdays. And we never thought that it would become so big, but it kind of, again, like a startup solved a pain point where first-time entrepreneurs, especially those who are not from business families, do not have the networks for funding, for finding the right people to hire, and also finding the first early customers, right? So Headstart has been very laser focused on early stage startups, and that is the kind of USP. And
the India Internet Engineering
Society. So we formed a non-profit to kind of train engineers and get academia, researchers and practitioners together so that we can kind of train them, how the process works, how they can contribute and learn, right? So it is like a two-way interface, and it has again like been remarkably successful because we've had volunteers, we've had like some amazing professors who have worked with us, and the students have made contributions to the Linux kernel. They have made contributions to implementations of drafts. So all of this is happening as we speak in India, right? So
talking about giving back to the ecosystem, giving back to the society, not just these two. In your role in Microsoft as the CTO in residence, for Microsoft for startups, you've been working with a lot of startups as well. There's a lot of technologists in those startups, a lot of business leaders in those startups to help them solve for challenging problems around technology, but not just technology, but also the scale-ups as well of those technologies. Could you share some light around, what was your role as a CTO in residence?
It was a very interesting role because you have obviously the brand name and the resources of Microsoft, but you're working with startups. And because I had worked in several different industries, as I've talked earlier in the podcast, I was able to help them with those specific industries, and wherever I couldn't, we had like a set of advisors who would do. A lot of the advice was very bespoke because a startup kind of building like a white space internet provider to somebody who's building for the farmer. I was kind of working with both. So you have to look at not only like the business, you have to understand business models and you have to understand the technological aspects and how both of them kind of reinforce each other. So it was very interesting. From that aspect, from a technology aspect, from an industry aspect, also I would say it was very interesting because you had like founders are by themselves are very motivated. So having this kind of constant feedback, because it was not a one-way street, right? I also learned about industries that I didn't know, and because I was working across different countries, every country had either a different ecosystem. For example, fintech in India is fairly mature, but probably even you can say to some extent Singapore, but probably that's not the same say in Australia or New Zealand, or even some parts of say Korea, for example. Again, there are language barriers also there. So you had like a global view because I worked with a bunch of people, and you also had like a very localized view, industries vertical specific view also. So combining these different aspects, being there for them when they made the right connection. So we kind of designed programs where we could connect them with the right experts, and that really helped them to take to the next level. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then you transitioned into a very AI specific role now.
Yes.
Right. And I think the whole world has been taken by a whirlwind or a tornado of AI, specifically I think, and you should be able to shed a lot of light on the evolution of AI over the last 2 decades, because it has been existent. We've spoken about this in your role at InMobi, in your role at Akamai, and then even at Zoomcar. But specifically from a consumer standpoint, the last 2 years, because of LLMs, generative AI at large, consumers are now completely in awe of AI and the impact that it's bringing. So maybe, let's just address the elephant in the room first. Are AI going to take away jobs?
So I would kind of frame this in the sense of the competition, right? Like I wouldn't say AI is taking away jobs, but somebody who knows how to use AI will definitely take your job, because it's just like, right, you had the same sense when computers maybe started coming in banks. If you knew how to kind of work with software, and work with computers, you had a huge advantage to somebody who just knew how to keep a paper ledger. Right? It's the same thing. Obviously, I think what is so different about AI is I think it's just taken over some of the cognitive abilities of automation, which was not kind of possible as much earlier, right? But even then, being able to kind of harness and use this technology really well actually will give an edge. So it will create different kinds of jobs. It will definitely drive transition, right? For example, if we didn't have the cloud and mobile, I think remote work would not have been possible. So can we say like remote work is like taking away jobs? Maybe, right? Maybe in the sense you are now competing maybe on a global scale, where you used to compete like on a local level. And I think AI will kind of make that more difficult for somebody who doesn't work with AI really well, right? So definitely the competition space has increased because if you are productive, you know your domain well, AI will in some sense be like a rocket booster for you.
Right.
But if you don't know AI, then I think you will be at a disadvantage. So I don't think that robots are coming tomorrow and kind of taking away our jobs.
Yeah.
I think we are still quite some time away from that.
Boston Dynamics robots can just jump in the air, do a 360, but they're not here to take the jobs yet.
Yeah, and again, like real world is like so different, and I think a great example, using AI also is cars, right? We've been talking about 5 levels, and definitely, I think, for example, cruise control, we don't think of it as AI, right? But cruise control actually does use some, or ADAS as it is not.
I think it would be AI.
Yeah, it is AI,
using
right?
Computer vision as well.
And because I worked in the automotive industry, I think a lot of people also don't realize that cars are like majorly electronical now. Even the ones which are like IC engines, internal combustion engines, have a lot of electronics as compared to maybe say even like 10-15 years ago.
True.
And with EV it has kind of gone to the next level. So coming back to the AI related things, I think if you don't know AI, definitely it's a disadvantage. We'll see how this transformation is going to take place. Obviously some roles I would say are going to be redundant for sure. But I think definitely it will be a huge productivity boost for somebody who understands a domain. So, what I tell AI entrepreneurs, having worked with a lot of them, and even with startups, when I took on this role, I was also majorly working with AI startups as well, is the boring parts are the ones which will have the greatest action, right? So if you have a cool demo, obviously, that is always nice. But if as a doctor, if somebody is helping me actually take notes, right? Like if whatever we're discussing, for example, can it summarize it?
Right.
In medical terms? And similarly, like in a legal profession, if you are a paralegal who does some search, can it augment that? Right. So those kind of professions, I think it will definitely affect in some aspects. Some aspects it completely won't affect. So it depends on where in that scale of that is it. What is so different is, we have to figure out how to kind of harness this technology so that we can use it in a very productive way.
Right. You had previously given an analogy on the discovery of fire as well, to the discovery of AI, or rather the recent advancement in AI. Would you want to share that analogy as well?
Yeah. So again, like when we we were having this discussion earlier, like when Cayman discovered fire, obviously, there will be several people who got burnt, and they said, okay, maybe this isn't great. And we have figured out, how do we harness power and technology of fire to make beautiful like dishes. At the same time, you can still today, if you want to use it, you can abuse it, like you can do arson or burn down a warehouse. Still, it's possible, right? But we found how to mitigate that by having like fire engines, having those kind of protocols in place, right. Making sure fire safety regulations are there. Because AI is so new, I think we are kind of figuring out, how do we build those guardrails. Microsoft also has been at the forefront talking about responsible AI and ethical AI,
right.
And building those guardrails at various levels, from a model layer to the UI. So there are multiple different aspects of it, but we have to figure out how do we build the systems of redressals, how do we build the systems of guardrails, so that no harm comes to human. And again, it differs. What is it that you use for? We were talking about hallucinations, for example, and I keep saying that hallucination is like a feature and not a bug, especially in creative industry, because if you're generating let's say a banner for a newsletter, you want it to be creative, quirky. Right. But maybe if you are like taking a medical transcription, you don't want that to be quirky. You want it to be very straight-jacketed that way. So the context depends on the industry they're working.
Yeah.
High risk sectors, I would say finance, healthcare, legal tech, where something going wrong can have a huge impact on humans or industries. You have to be very, very careful and have stringent guardrails and audit processes, whether it is human in the loop, whether it is some other model or mechanism checking the output. You need to have those kind of guardrails at every level. But if it is like a creative, you want it also to, for example, and creative need not mean necessarily like generating images and beautiful copy and all of that. It can also mean like when you're kind of doing drug discovery.
Right.
Obviously, there are certain rules the laws of physics to maybe discover certain modules and predict, maybe certain protein structures. But you also wanted to be creative, figure out how things would go. Another good example is AlphaGo, right? It came up with this move. I think it's called Move 22 or something, or 42. I think Move 22. And Lee Sedol, who was the top Go player, he was like mesmerizing that, how could it think of it? So definitely, I think there are aspects of creativity. What is so different about LLMs is always from a software engineering perspective, we never had elements which were probabilistic. We always had elements which were very deterministic. If you did A, B, and C, you would get D. If you do A, B, and C, again you would get D. But that's not how it works with AI. You do A, B, and C, every time the output will be different. And I feel we have to figure out, how to use that components in our systems.
Right.
By building these guardrails, having human in the loops, having all of these mitigation measures, where things can be reported, things can be improved. Software engineering discipline has to change to accommodate for that.
Right.
And I think we'll be going through this transformation. So when we have this conversation maybe 5 years later, I think we'll talk about it very differently.
No, very true. In fact, in one of those conversations that I witnessed in US between Sam Altman and Mark Benioff, they touched upon in a fireside chat between them, they touched upon hallucinations. And the analogy was very simple. Hallucinations, like everything else, every other parameters, is controlled by radio knobs. You can turn it off by leveraging only restricted data or limited data to tap into, for the model to give you outputs. Or you could put it at the other extreme, like you mentioned, in a creative field, where the idea is to use this as a feature, right? Hallucinations will bring out the best creativity possible for specific domains, for specific industries, for specific use cases, and this is going to be used as a feature. So a very interesting perspective that you've shared on hallucination as well.
And in terms of hallucination, I think when we probably talked a lot about this maybe 2 years, when this model came. But over a period of time, from an engineering perspective, I think we have figured out, there are various systems that what we call RAG or retrieval augmented generation,
right?
Fine tuning. There are various systems that we have come up with to reduce the amount of hallucinations, and they are now accepted as kind of mundane, or I would say they are not even state of the art, I would say, because people have figured out how to kind of reduce that. So again, talking about giving the analogy of fire, right? Now we know, how to kind of control it, harness it. And I think it's the same thing, even if you look at something like a nuclear technology, right? You can use it to build nuclear reactors. And I think because we both come from a startup world, you have been seeing, I think even Sam Altman has invested in a very small nuclear reactor, right? Which can probably fit in a room kind of thing,
right?
Which are very modular. And people are investing in those because they are a great source of, I would say, clean energy.
Right.
Whereas you have nuclear weapons also. I mean, there are rogue states around the world that are using it for different purposes, right? So we need to have ethical and a guardrail framework to kind of be able to harness technology. So we need, obviously, government mandated law, but also as engineers. And I keep on saying this to engineers. I think one of my friends has this very beautiful quote. For Werner von Braun. So Werner von Braun was a famous military technologist who built rockets. First he built it for Germans, and then eventually, he built it for the Allies. And he had this quote where he said, "My job when I'm building rockets is to make them go up. I don't care where they come down." And you can't be nonchalant like that when you're an engineer. You have to know that your impact can be both positive and negative. So engineers have to understand this, I would say, at the first level. And at a systemic level, we have to figure out how do we build this system so that we have safety at that top of our agenda.
So Vinayak, very importantly, right, since we have been talking about safety, guardrails, and value-driven ethical AI, are we ready for ethical AI? What I mean by that is, technology is transforming things very rapidly. The technology advancement is very volatile. It's shaping every week into a new model. In this day and era, are we able to cope up with the right kind of ethical AI, with the right kind of guardrails to shape this technology and harness it in a meaningful way?
I would say I think it is still evolving. I think even though I work in the field of AI, and this is something that we were talking earlier as well. When I was working for Akamai, even in a paper being presented in a top networking conference from it being implemented, typically till it was like mass, it went into mass commercialization. Typically take 2 to 3 years till it was deployed in production and working very well. But with AI, I think that time gap has reduced to maybe like 3 to 6 months, which is like amazing. So on one level, it is very great because the diffusion of technology is happening much faster.
True.
And that also you can see how fast technology is adopted. Whereas, for example, how long it took the internet to reach 100 million users as compared to mobile, as compared to maybe something like cloud or even chat GPT. It was very rapid. So diffusion of technology is happening really fast. And hence, as human, obviously we have anxiety because there's a huge amount of change. Some of it we can't control, some of it we can't. So this anxiety is very understandable. But again, I think there has to be coming back to the same thing. There has to be an awareness to figure out this can cause harm, and hence what are the mechanisms to do. Like for example, hallucinations. We have various mechanisms to kind of reduce the number of hallucinations. You can have human in the loop, better redressal systems if to kind of manage that like really well. So we are ready, I would say, for ethical AI, but ethics also is also a field where there's deep amount of research happening, right? For example, mostly when we think about ethics, we're thinking from a Western point of view. Some things that might be acceptable maybe in Indian context or maybe a Chinese context may not be very similar to what we look from a different aspect. So that is when I think what AI is also, because it's kind of coming into the cognitive domain, it's also making us feel what does it really mean to be a human, and what is the society that we want to create. And those are the large answers that we have to be able to shape technology, right? And we were talking about science fiction earlier. Science fiction also kind of shapes this discourse because it talks about probable futures, and some of it is kind of coming through both the dystopian aspects as well as the utopian aspect. So ethics is kind of always evolving. There are certain frameworks, and as you saw, like Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, for example, also kind of put a framework around that. So often, I think when I would say that definitely not only is this question debated in the research labs and the practitioners, but also in the realm of literature, because literature in many aspects also does shape how humans think about technology and how scientists think about technology.
No, totally agree, right? There have been multiple books, there have been multiple movies, all sorts of content that's come out, to kind of nudge technologists, scientists to try and solve for problems and visualize it from a slightly futuristic sense of it, right? Be it Hieroglyph as a book, be it Westworld, Black Mirror, a bunch of these, content shows, TV shows, etc., or movies for that matter, which have pushed us in that direction. Very interesting to get your take on ethical AI as well. And you said that, there is scope in ethical AI. We're building on top of that. I want to get your perspective on 2 things. The first one being, it seems to be like an AI race. Everyone talks about the AI race. Is this AI race limited to organizations, or is it limited to or is it now extended to geographies? What I mean by that is there are days that I see there are leading organizations, including that of Microsoft, where some of these organizations are trying to get ahead of each other because they have to remain profitable, they have to give back to the stakeholders. So they are trying their best to solve for challenges using AI, and that's the AI race. So one is, when is this AI race ever going to end? Is it AGI? Is it ASI? Is it something else? 2, today, is it between organizations or is it between nations? Is China going to be?
It is both. And again, there are lessons in history on those, right? Like today, many corporations are as powerful as nations as well. And it's not like a hidden fact. It's obvious to everyone if you look at market capitalization of various companies and the GDP of various companies as well. So corporations do have a responsibility here as well. So there is definitely competition between different organizations. and also between different kind of countries, right? Like for example, DeepSeek, when it came out, it created, like, I wouldn't say chaos, but created a sensation because how good it was, and it was trained at like a fraction of the cost, which people thought wasn't possible, right? So you're seeing this kind of layout between nations because people realize this is one of those technologies that can really change, I would say, the way humans relate to each other, work with each other, work with different organizations as well. So again, like everybody wants to kind of shape it, and again I feel there's definitely a race between different nations as well as different corporations, and then there are startups on the mix as well. And what we considered startups maybe like say 2 years before, and now I think large enough and bigger than many companies, right? And there are examples like OpenAI, Anthropic, and many of them are there, right? These are just two of them, which are quite large, both in terms of the valuation, if you were to use one of the metrics, or even the revenue, because they have actually decent, quite large amount of revenue as well, compared to some of the other companies that are in the field. So I would say this is a race between corporations and also I would say between nations. But I'm also hopeful of the future, right? Like you quoted Westworld and
Black Mirror.
But these are also very dystopian. But I am also very hopeful for the future, right? I think you're talking about like this really nice series, like two different really nice series that I love. One is by Martha Wells, where there is a lovable robot who is also very violent. I mean, it's not like the robot is violent, but in the service of like humankind. And while the name is like the robot, it's actually very illuminating because this robot actually likes soap operas, and whenever he or it is summoned to do something for humans, they realize, oh, I need to kind of drop this. And I was really interested in episode 54 of say a series, whatever, like 6 or something, and then it has to drop and then get on. So in some sense, I think it humanizes. It also talks about the quirkiness in which we can go. There's also this beautiful series by Becky Chambers where it talks about a post-industrial world where humans have figured out there has been some kind of civilizational collapse, and humans have realized that, okay, maybe technology is something maybe to be ostracized, so they send all of the robots to a forest, and then the world has been divided into different parts, and till a human decides to, who is a monk, a tea monk to be very specific, goes to a forest and then discovers a robot, and there is sense of discovery and a deep philosophical question about what it means to be human, what kind of society is what we want to build. So it's a beautiful story. It has 2 parts, I think. A psalm for the it's called Psalm for the Built, and then there is another one, I forgot the name, but it's called the Monk and the Robot series by Becky Chambers. So this and Martha Wells. So there is I would say it's not all dystopian. Right. There is hope to have a future where technology and AI especially can coexist and augment us. And when we talk about augmentation, right, like both you and me are wearing specs.
Right.
This is augmentation. We have a phone in our pocket. This is augmentation.
True.
But we just take it for granted. So I feel that as we go on, I think maybe us and even maybe our children will just take it for granted. Just as our kids, for example, cannot imagine a world where they are not connected all the time, right?
Right.
And for us who are like old enough, we can imagine a world, or we lived in a world where you had to, like, to meet friends, you had to do a phone call and decide ahead of time where you will meet.
True.
And we don't do that anymore, right?
I used to take printouts of Google Maps back in the day because my phone did not have that capability.
Yeah, I mean,
so I would just draw out the addresses, mark it out through a pen, and then travel.
And the world has changed so fast, right? For example, maps. I remember I had gone to New Zealand in 2008, and we drove around, and we used to get these AAA books where you used to kind of see the map, and I used to see it set as a navigator and tell the person who is driving, or the other way around, that okay, we have to follow this road, and then we're going to get a right. And there used to be like a pull-out map that you used to look at, and none of us do that anymore, right? True. And then you had those TomTom devices also, or Garmin devices you had, but now everybody just puts their phone and
Very true.
And it's like very well updated. You can even see in some sense it has reduced the sense of discovery, because even before I go to a shop, I know what ratings it has, what its menu is, where it is located.
Right.
So it has reduced that sense of discovery, but it has also made it more powerful, because then we can be very curative about what exactly we want.
Right.
So AI will also kind of continue along that path, is my understanding.
Very interesting and profound. And that brings me to another question, Vinayak. You said that there's a possibility, which is not dystopian, which where AI would have emotional intelligence. That means we would have touched AGI, and yet we would coexist beautifully. What are the human values you think that will allow us to coexist? I mean, humans would have to have some distinction. What, according to you, are those distinctions when there's emotional intelligence in AI as well?
So I feel, personally, I believe that technology is a great tool, but we should not allow it to become like a master, right? So, for example, self-driving cars is great because, to some extent, because it can probably cause less accidents. Though there are like challenges in terms of agency, because there's no human driver. If there's a crash, whom do you blame? Do you blame the software? Do you blame the coder? So there are all of these questions which honestly do not have very clear answers.
Right.
But how do we live? I think it will be a sense of discovery, right? Like it's like asking how do we live with, like, say, social media. I mean, it's very, very hard to predict it ahead of time.
Right.
While there have been some benefits of social media, we have also seen some of the downsides also. I think there's this beautiful book by Jonathan Haidt. I think it's called The Anxious Generation, I think it's called, where he talks about how social media has affected adolescents.
Right.
So I think some of these effects will only be apparent, I think, maybe post facto. I think science fiction tries to predict some of these. We can see a straight line, but as in diffusion of technologies, it would be very difficult to predict. For example, when social media just came out, until I think maybe Obama used it in a way that he has, he was in some sense a product of a great social media campaign, amongst others. Obviously, they had a lot of other aspects to it, and I'm not trying to discredit that. And you can see the same thing happening, how Trump is using social media as well, both in its positive and negative aspects. So we'll figure out how to live with it. There will be aspects of it we don't like, just as we don't like things about social media. But, like, for example, if you have niche interests, it has been so easy compared to earlier. Like, if you collect maybe, say, coins or maybe tiny cars, just as a hobbyist, to find people who are maybe either interested in a sub-niche or a niche, which there are not many people, and you can have multiple people connect easily. And social media has enabled that. Internet has enabled that. At the same time, AI will also, maybe I can see early signs where it can help people learn and adapt. For the example,
but
learning.
Will AI have that compassion? Will AI have that survival instinct?
You can't expect machines to have compassion, because I think compassion is a very human aspect, right?
So that is what will differentiate us.
Yes, that is what will differentiate us, and we have to, as I said, coming back to what I said about Werner Braun and some of these things, we have to kind of make it is not going to happen automatically. We have to be conscious about it, as maybe personally I feel as a technologist, as an engineer, to do that, and we have to make sure that those values are kind of embedded in the systems that we build.
Right.
So it is.
So again, ethical AI and societal AI is going to play a very important, crucial role in how we set up those systems.
How we set up the systems, what are the forms of redressals, how do we make sure that we are able to detect harms early, and how are we able to, in some sense, either compensate or not let them happen. So you have, as I said, like, you have to be super careful in certain domains, but if a chatbot, for example, gives you a wrong answer once in a while, it's probably fine, because 90% of the time it will give an answer which is right. Once in a while, as long as the consequences are not very drastic, it is still fine. Like for example, if it helps children, for example, and I've been working with startups that are working in education, it can help some children learn really well, because some kids learn really fast, some kids learn really slow. If we were to do this without technology, we can't today, because of the student teacher ratio, we can't have personalized attention to a great extent, unless like you are in a private school and those cost a lot.
Yeah, I still use Perplexity till date to create a story every new story every day for my 4-year-old.
Yeah, and
So-
I use it like an editor, right? Like for example, when I read books, or I write an email, I write out what I want, and you ask it, say, hey, you do not use these words, like compelling, engaging. So you have, again, like I said, like you have to figure out, what is it good at, and then I use it as an editor to write in a language which is much more coherent,
Right.
and also very concise. So I use ChatGPT as an editor very well, but at the end of the day, I also, this is how I use AI, right? Like I write something, I use it as a co-pilot or whatever,
Right.
and then I take back the output and then kind of digest it and still edit it, right?
Fair.
So as long as we're using it as a tool, and we don't kind of fall in love in technology, like blindly in love in technology, I think we should be fine.
So
but again,
for-
it has to be a conscious choice. It is not like a normal path which we'll do. We have to be, just like with nuclear energy, like we had all of these regulations. Maybe we might have to have some kind of agreement about how we want to use it at a corporation level, or some kind of standard, or at a
Global level.
at a global level.
Makes sense.
And also maybe at an industry level, because every industry, like healthcare, is very different. Say
Right.
from helping you buy, like a buying assistant. Again, we talked about hallucination, right? You want
Right.
it to be creative, because if you want a buying guide, you want it to be creative. If
Right.
you're, for example, if you're selecting a gift, but when you're kind of maybe suggesting a treatment to a doctor, you don't want it to be creative. The doctor will eventually take the final call, though, right? The AI is not taking the final call. Doctor takes the final call. So again, that guardrail is the human in the loop.
So
as I said.
Vinayak, if you were to, suggest the founders, a lot of entrepreneurs in India are trying to ride this wave of AI, right, and develop solutions to various problems using the latest developments in AI, leveraging new models or building new models, building new wrappers. Where do you think will be more disruption, or where can Indian entrepreneurs find more value using by creating models, LLMs, new models which are coming up in various countries, or by spending more time building wrappers?
Rapper is, I think, a very, in my opinion, a very like abused concept, right? Because like, what do you call a compiler? Compiler is a wrapper around maybe a CPU, right?
Right.
Because it translates human readable code into something that a machine can understand. So you can
Right.
call a compiler. So wrapper depends on what is like the depth, right? If you are whatever you call a wrapper has sufficient, it has to have two. I think to stand out in the AI space, you need to have two different things. One is you have to figure out how do you create data that is curated to do a mode. I'll give an example, right? Let's say you're suggesting something in the creative space, like could be paralegal or any domain. Can you incorporate feedback that is coming from humans saying that this looks okay, this looks wrong, this is how it can be done? And that then goes back into making your system better, right? So now what happens is you have built a system, whether it's a model or the entire system, that becomes a self-reinforcing loop.
Right.
That becomes a mode, because the more people use, the better it. So you have created this flywheel of your data becoming much better, your training becoming much better, much deeper. So if a new competitor, even if it is he or she is more well funded, will find it difficult to break in, because one, you might have distribution or understanding of domain that is deep enough.
Right.
The second thing I feel that which I feel can be many of the incumbents or larger companies or even say mid-sized companies will be disrupted is design. Because now you don't have a point and click interface. You can interact using voice. You can interact using natural language. Can you create interfaces that are natural enough, interactions that are natural enough, that will, the new generation will find it like really easy. For example, if my or your son were to use, just say chat to ChatGPT and ask it certain question and it were to give me an answer, I would probably not go to a search engine.
Right.
I can just talk to this assistant all the time and it will kind of keep on either recording it and saying that, hey, this is a summary of your day.
A search engine which is focused I mean, see, if you look at OpenAI and ChatGPT, right, or Manos or DeepSeek, they're models with various strengths, right, across reasoning, across mathematics, across various parameters, right, versus a Perplexity which uses all these models in various contexts, and it lets the user choose the model that we would like to use as a search engine, right? Now, in the evolution and even in terms of economic development in a market like India, where founders are keen to come up with the next big thing, should we let countries like or founders from countries like US and China keep developing newer models and just try to create interfaces in the form of wrappers to
No, I
tap
think you
into
should.
that?
There can be innovation, I feel, at every level. I think what DeepSeek has shown, and I think again there is a pre and post DeepSeek, is that with lesser amount of money, but good amount of talent and understanding, it is actually becoming easier to build a model. And sometimes in some cases you can use like an open source
Right.
model, like Phi from Microsoft or Llama from Meta, and actually fine tune them enough so that they are good enough for your particular domain. So it depends. Eventually, it depends on the use case. So yeah, it is possible to build a model, but I think it's also possible to fine tune a model which will get you 90% of the way there.
No, considering that
And that is that. Yeah.
you spoke about cultural nuances, that ethical AI would also be dependent on cultural nuances, and those cultural nuances in India are going to be very diverse.
Yeah.
Our languages are very diverse, our cultural nuances are very diverse. Do you see a scenario where building a very meaningful AI model or LLM model from India, keeping in mind all the diverse parameters that we have to look at, would create a lot more holisticity to LLM model from India? Or do you think it's
It is possible. I think definitely. I think one thing, for example, right? Maybe the models initially, at least, many of the models actually supported maybe English as the base on which it was trained, and obviously now there's either a translation or a training layer that is there. What could be different in India is two things, right? You have multi-language support from the get-go. That is something different. So how do you, for example, I'm getting very technical at this point, so kind of excuse me, but how do you tokenize? Like how do you basically break the language or the phonemes into different parts? Also, can you use, because, and this is I think where the cultural aspects come. I'll just talk about a little bit before I give this. For example, largely, if you look at the West, or what is, I would say Europe, in history, Europe, a lot of the things that are culturally relevant are the ones that are written down. So the written word has a huge amount of primacy. If you look at India, our culture for the longest period of time, and again this going back in history, is also very oral, right? So for example, chanting of mantras, all our history that is passed on generation, a lot of it is very oral across. So we are a very oral culture predominantly. For a long time, a lot of our epics were also not written down. Right. And then you have, again, I'm drawing in broad strokes. So again, like there is a written word, and also there is oral history in Europe as well. I'm not kind of discounting that, but I'm saying predominantly ours is like a oral culture and has been that for a long time, right? A lot of culture, for example, in India, is also passed along in the form of song or chanting. Whereas in if you were to look at like references in the US or Europe, a lot of it is kind of written down. If you go to East Asia, if you go to China, South Korea, Japan, a lot of their culture is very visual.
Right.
And also idea based, right? For example, the script is ideographic, Mandarin. If you look at a Japanese woodblock print, or a Japanese or a Chinese painting for that matter, the colors represent maybe like seasons or certain human emotions. What is depicted, whether it's in the foreground, whether it's in the background, how the elements are placed together, all of them have meaning.
Right.
Whereas if you look at largely, again, I'm drawing broad strokes, largely look at West, this does not have as much meaning as, say, compared to East Asia. So it's very visual culture.
Right.
So I think if you have something, and when we take that culture and translate it to a domain of AI, we can see that, it can be interesting if we take all of these aspects which are oral, if we can interact with a voice-based system, yeah, I think that can be a huge differentiator. If you have multilingual stuff, it can be a huge differentiator. But you also have challenges with related to data, right? For example,
So Geo can solve for it, data.
no, again, that very fundamental problems. I'll give an example of a language, very small language that is my mother tongue, Konkani, right? Now, Konkani is actually spoken. It has again different dialects, but it's written down in 5 different scripts. It's written down in Devanagari, it's written down in Roman, it's written down in Kannada script, it's written in Malayalam script, it's also written in Perso-Arabic script. Now, if you are to get a corpus of all of these, you have to have OCR, like, to recognize whatever is written down. I'm not even touching on the oral aspect. You take all of these things, translate in a common format that can be understood. So you need OCR technology, you need representation technology. Once you have a corpus, then you will figure out how do you take the input. So this is fundamentally different from English because the language is in some sense standardized and is standardized for a long period of time. Right? So if you were to even like you say something like Spanish, there are obviously certain letters, the pronunciation is different, the words are different. But the script is, I would say, largely the same, right? Which is like the Latin script. So again, there are these challenges right from how do you represent to the oral history. So if somebody can solve that, and it will require huge amount of investment, maybe from the local, corporations as well as from the government, to build first this corpus.
Right.
And I have seen one example of doing this really well. There is this movement in Hyderabad, or I would say Telangana and Andhra Pradesh to some extent, to create this archive called Kathalu, which is done by, again, I might be misquoting, so I think people should look this up, where they have created a set of stories where people have created this corpus of stories in the local language, which can be used as a base for training. So they created that data set. Right. So if you're able to create that data set and also do it in a voice format, I think there is definitely a scope for a model that understands the Indian nuances really, really well.
It makes a lot of sense. And
then again, at every again, innovation, again, we talked about a model layer. Innovation is possible at every layer.
But
as long as
your recommendation, if you had to give founders in India a takeaway, what would your recommendation be? Go for wrappers, go for LLMs, or go for both?
I would say, I think it's very hard to give advice on either, right? Because somebody who might have the capability to pull this off should actually absolutely go for the model. I think there is a scope for building a model. Sure. There's larger scope, I would say, for building wrappers because innovation in the data and creating this, I would say, self-reinforcing cycle and also leading by design. Right. I think that can create. So if you want quick wins, actually don't go for like the sleek demos. I would say automate the boring stuff and you will see a lot. And this is again very counterintuitive. But if you want traction, I think so
Agentic AI is also the way to go forward then in that case.
Agentic AI combines actions with, it combines actions with LLM capability. So it can have an impact in the real world, right? For example.
So the short-term gains, a lot of them would be through Agentic AI.
Some of it can be through Agentic AI because the automation can be done. For example, if you want to use WhatsApp as a medium, you can have voice enabled and you can have that chat.
Right.
And then if you know based on the conversation what my preferences are, what my budget is, what my credit card is, you can actually go ahead and maybe, for example, book a flight, or even maybe file if I have Aadhaar authentication, fine, even fill up a form for me based on that information, and whatever information is missing, just do it over voice and dial and do that. So Agentic can make some of this automation really well because the agent actually acts as an extension of you.
Right.
Just as the specs in some sense acts as an extension of your body, right? Yeah. So yeah.
Fair. Thank you so much, Vinayak. That was very deep. That gave us a lot of perspectives, and I think entrepreneurs, innovators in this country would actually be able to leverage a lot of the pointers that you've shared to start building out towards and solving certain problems, right? On that note, I do want to go into a rapid fire. So very quick questions, very quick answers. Let's get your perspective on this. AGI in the next 10 years, possible?
I'm a little bit of a skeptic. I think it will take longer than that.
Got it. Who will come out on top, US or China or some other country?
It's difficult to say at this point of time because I think geopolitics is like, because of the way geopolitics has been happening with all of the different wars, it's very hard to say, but definitely it's a race. I mean, it's very hard to say one on another. It's too early in the game.
Biggest myth on AI that you would like to kind of bust?
Biggest myth. Yeah, I think the biggest myth is like AI is going to, I would say, take away your jobs. I think AI will not take away your jobs for the most part, for most people, but definitely somebody who has AI skills will definitely it's possible that will take away your job. So you're not competing against, in some sense, AI, but somebody who can use the AI really well. I would say that is the biggest myth.
Got it. Favorite movie on AI?
I think Her. I really like the human emotion, how it is kind of layered, and I think amazing. I mean, there is, the actress has, Scarlett Johansson has not appeared in the movie, but her presence is so beautifully felt, right? We talked about voice and image, and her voice is so dominant in that interaction. So I felt that the movie did a really beautiful job, I would say.
That's amazing. What's your favorite tech gadget that you can't live without?
I think it's probably my phone,
Right.
as it is for most people. Yeah.
If you could collaborate with any tech personality, living or deceased, who would it be?
Tech personality. It's a tough one. Definitely, I think I'm saying tech is not just computer tech, right?
Right.
I would say Richard Feynman. I would like. I mean, if I had a choice and kind of be an apprentice, maybe somebody would like Richard Feynman, who's been like very quirky and exceptionally inspirational for me, because he was not only good at one thing, but he was actually good at multiple different things and has written some really interesting and quirky books as well. So maybe like Richard Feynman, definitely one of my heroes.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Vinayak. It was brilliant. And for that, you have to get a hamper. So I'm just going to give you one.
I like this part, which is like, coffee with Karan kind of thing.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
It's not as fancy as a coffee with Karan hamper, but it's very personalized, and it's brought in or sponsored by Kapek Design, who come up with corporate stationery and gifting in that space, and they're very, very personalized as well. So to Kapek Design.
Thank you so much for this and for having me on the podcast.
My pleasure. So folks out there, please do check out this episode, and I'm sure that there are going to be a lot of learning, specifically for technologists and innovators out there. Also for people who are not in tech, do listen to this episode, because Vinayak has very clearly called it out. It's not AI who are going to take away your jobs. It's other people who know AI or who can leverage AI who will take away your jobs. So prompt engineering and basic utilization of AI and leveraging tools is going to be paramount in the race ahead, and specifically to make sure that you continue with your jobs and take up newer jobs as well. So thank you so much. Do share your feedback in comments, and we'll come back to you with another episode of the Innovators and Disruptors podcast soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Feel free to share your perspectives through comments, subscribe to the channel, and do send us some suggestions as well. Thank you.